Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Faye, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Mary.
I'm so delighted to talk with you today and learn all about you and culture and Quill, which sounds so interesting. But before we get to present day, let's go all the way back. And can you tell us about the very first job you ever had as a young person?
Oh, goodness. So my very, very first job was probably a counselor in training at our local YMCA. I grew up in Queens, New York, and I wanted that job so bad.
So, what was that job?
Yeah, so I was a counselor, a camp counselor. Sort of the prerequisite when you're 14 is to have this sort of training role before you get the full-time counselor role. So I remember it being my first job interview, not quite knowing how to dress for the interview. I think I walked in with like a Pepsi can. But the woman who would be my future boss, Judy, was so gracious, and kind throughout the interview. And I remember when it was over, she said to me, for future interviews, you shouldn't bring something in them. But I got the job. I remember being very excited about that. And I ended up working at that same camp every summer until college.
Wow. Wow. I worked at a summer camp for 2 years in college and loved it. So, I mean, I know the draw of camp, but at 14, what drew you to working at a camp in the summers?
Yeah, I think, I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers. One has since passed away.
Mm.
But for me, it was being able to have responsibility. I kind of felt very cared for by my brothers. They were very protective of me. But being able to be in an environment where I had some responsibility, people are trusting you with their children. I was working with 2 to 6 year olds, so they were really cute
Mm.
and sweet. And I just remember feeling very trusted and also kind of like I had to step up in this very responsible way.
Wow. Yeah. That's a great first job. There's everything that you said, there's so much rolled into that. And it must have been a good experience with the mentorship you received if you did it for that long. So what was the management mentoring like there?
Yeah, so interestingly, I mean, Judy was fantastic. She was a great boss, and I wish I could find her. I've tried like since on Facebook just to see like what is she up to, but I don't remember her last name. But she was incredible. I think one interesting thing that taught me too, kind of about work is hierarchy,
Mm.
sometimes in environment. So I had really fantastic sort of adult counselors that I worked under during my time, but I remember having my first sort of difficult supervisory experience there as well, where, I kind of felt strongly that there was a child, not that was being mistreated, but more or less a little bit unfairly, kind of like if that child spoke out of turn, the other counselor in the room was very quick to kind of punish them. And I felt like strongly that, hey, maybe there was a little bit of an imbalance there, but being very quickly kind of put in my place, as a 15 or 16-year-old, kind of not knowing and being a little bit uncomfortable with that. I think I was very receptive to learning and growth, but
Mhm.
also, I think it planted the seeds early that sometimes a hierarchy in a given position doesn't necessarily speak to, the ability to influence or the ability to have great ideas. They can sort of come, in all directions in a workspace. At the time, I don't think I had much agency to sort of push back. I kind of had to cower a little bit, but it always stayed in my mind, that experience.
That is, that's a great experience at a young age for all the reasons that you said, because so many times we think people are an authority for a reason.
Uh,
Well, a lot of times we think the reason is because they are mature or they've advanced because they have these particular skills, and not so much. Some
yeah.
hopefully, but not always the case, right? And learning that, but then also learning how to deal with less than optimal managers because while many of the managers and bosses we have are fantastic, many people suffer under um, managers who aren't really suited for that kind of role.
Yeah, and two, there's a powerlessness that you feel too when you feel in a position that you can't really advocate or kind of stand up and say things, especially, in this case, you know, I didn't need the job as much as I wanted the job at the
Mhm.
time. I didn't come from a lot, but at the same time, I didn't have to like bring my paycheck home to my mom or anything. But if I wanted those little extras, at the time I'm dating myself, but to buy a CD or, or things like that, that's sort of what like the salary was for. But feeling like, well, I can't quit this job because I really want, this paycheck, but I also can't kind of fully step into who I am or what I feel because of sort of my position in the hierarchy of it all.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot about the exuberance and the zealousness of youth, right? There's something
Yeah.
like when you are in your late teens and early 20s, there's just something so beautiful about, you are sure that you are right. You see so clearly, other people do not. And there's something about that because sometimes as we get older, we sort of lose that edge. And so we maybe don't fight as hard for something that we think is unjust because I don't know if it's jadedness or whatever it might be. And so, you get a little bit of wisdom, but you lose some of the zealousness, but you have the zealousness when you're young and you're not sure, you're not always so prudent as to
Yeah.
how to take it out. But it's interesting because I think, in our late teen years, early 20s are for many people, the first time they have these experiences of this hierarchy. Well, this person is my boss and I don't respect them. Right. And that it's hard to take at any time, but there's something really dissonant that you come up across, I think, when you're younger, because it shouldn't be that way. Right.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
wrong. Later, we know it's not. We just kind of accept it, and for a variety of reasons. But
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a certain fearlessness too, right?
mhm.
When you're young and when you're older, the stakes are higher. You have a mortgage, you're thinking about paying for college for your kids, so you're less likely to sort of push against the envelope. But yeah, I do think that that's the beauty as a mom now of teens. Like, I think
Mm,
that's the beauty in youth and sort of you want to hold on to it, right? That light. I mean, there's a lot to learn, of course. Like
right,
sometimes you got to sit down and listen, right?
right.
I mean, that's just kind of what it is. But then I also don't want them to lose that fierceness, that
Yeah.
for what they know about themselves, what they know is right, what they know is in alignment with kind of that, what I call, like that just gut feeling, that you should always trust. And I think at the time I was pretty sure of that, and I remember going home and talking to my mom about it. And she's a lifelong civil service employee, like a government employee. And it's like also a beautiful and amazing human, full of fire and all the things, but also kind of like, if you want this job, kiddo, like you may have to just be okay with this for the time being, and it is a tough lesson. It is a really, really tough one.
Yeah. It's a good one if because of course we can learn from what doesn't work. We learn a lot from the difficulties we've had, um, and how we navigated them. Some of the ones I look back and I think, oh, I did that well, and some of them I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
that was I'm not doing that again. I'm gonna
Yeah.
try a different strategy. So where did you go? But first of all, what did you major in college?
I majored in English.
Okay.
Yeah. I was a poet and a writer, and I read Shakespeare and wrote papers all throughout college and then went to law school.
So why the shift?
Yeah, I think, I've been reflecting on this a lot recently because my oldest is a musician. So
Mm,
he's in kind of this state now, getting ready to go to college of like, do I major in music? Do I kind of hedge all bets and run in this direction? Or do I think about something that maybe will make the grown-ups a little bit more comfortable? And I think for me at the time, I saw the difference, right? In people's reaction to I want to be a writer and I want to be a lawyer,
mm,
especially coming from where I came from. I was the first in my family, the first, even to this point on both sides, to be a lawyer. So when I said it, people's faces lit up, oh, this is what you want to do. So as much as I hate to say it, it very much had to do a lot with external forces at the time.
mhm,
I also, my mother, like I mentioned, she worked for the government. She worked in the court. She was a court clerk. She was one of those people that does like, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth? Like that was her job. And she worked for a fantastic judge when I
mm,
was in elementary and middle school, who was like a mentor to me.
mm.
So I think for me, I said, okay, he did this incredible, amazing thing. Maybe I can do this thing too. And it's going to make the grown-ups proud and impressed. And I had a a writing professor when I was in college who was like, you will regret this. Like he was not supportive of me at all. He wrote a recommendation, but was not supportive of me going to law school. But that sort of framed my trek into this other career.
It is so interesting how we what converges to the decision that we make when we think about career. My husband majored in classical percussion undergraduate, and now he's a philosophy professor. So,
Yeah.
but he would not give up his music career and everything that he learned. And so many times I think we can fool ourselves in thinking to be gainfully employed or whatever is one straight path. But as we know, it is we're the sum total of our experiences. If we pay attention to those experiences, uh, then and transferable skills, and just thinking a little bit, we can really kind of curate, well, what fits well with me. I am sure your ability to read and to read critically, and I mean, is so helpful in the practice of law and, going through law school and then practicing law.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I really firmly believe too, when we sit back in reflection on our lives, like all of the pieces kind of fit together in a really interesting way. So though it probably wasn't one of the most informed decisions I made, it's not one that I regret. Going to law school, I met my husband in law school, which was great. But it also, I mean, it taught me to think in a whole new way.
Mhm.
I also was coming out of college at a time. It was during I think we had just gone to war in Iraq, or we were kind of in the war. So I was feeling really strongly about a lot of social justice things. So I saw my legal career as a means of effectuating change. And I practiced law for 10 years in a way that I feel like I was very much proud of. But to your point, those parts of yourself, they don't go away. So I was continuously writing. I was writing when I was in law school, scribbling on little legal pads in between cases and things, because it was so core to kind of who I was, but also what made me happy, and what made me feel kind of the most myself, was being able to kind of write my way through life and process things.
Mhm.
So it continued to be a big part of my life until I ultimately was able to transition into journalism.
So why did you decide to go from law to journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I was again practicing. I had been in the same job for about 10 years, but I was simultaneously writing. So I'd started a website, I was publishing things online, and really loving doing it. And it took a very long dinner with my sister-in-law, where she was like, you kind of have two jobs, like you're kind of operating in these two separate spaces. And, the funny thing I think too about doing things that you love is it doesn't always feel like work. So at the time, it didn't really feel like, I was writing wherever anybody would take my work. I wasn't even thinking a lot about it. But then I started thinking about that. I said,
Mhm.
well, what would this look like as a career now at this juncture? At that point, I was, had two children. I had been married for quite some time. It was scary, to kind of think about what a leap like that would look like. But I ultimately thought, let me start putting some of this on LinkedIn, like as work experience, like this
Mhm.
website I started, this editing that I'm doing over here. And then when an opportunity came up, for a position for a really great journalism role, I thought, we'll see what happens. And I got it. I was really surprised that they took that experience that I thought was just me having the time of my life, as translating into a way that I could kind of, switch careers.
And so you were in journalism for a while, and I suppose you still are. That's so you're now doing you have your own organization called Culture and Quill. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So yeah, I was in journalism for a while. I was able to lead a lot of great brands, and ultimately kind of, to be honest, just reached a point of burnout. I
Yeah.
think, what I tell my children a lot, and also folks that I mentor, is that, a lot of times when you're good at something, people latch on to it and they just
Mhm.
want you to give it and give it and give it and give it. And I just found myself in a place where I was just unable to shut off work. I was working until into the evening. My kids were coming in and I was waving to them, and not really as actively engaged in my life as I wanted. And one day I kind of just sat up and I thought, I don't know that this is sustainable. Like, I
Mhm.
don't know that this is how I want to continue. I call it stage infinity burnout, which is where I was, just in a place where I just felt dizzy and confused. And I can't point the finger at a particular work environment or a thing. It's kind of just the nature of the corporate work environment right now.
Mhm.
I think it's easy in some ways to sort of blame the work structure, and there's a lot of critique to go around when it comes to that. But it was a kind of a inflection point for me of realizing that no one took what I didn't give away. No one
Mhm.
took what I wasn't readily giving, and I had to sort of face that. So I ended up leaving for the first time. Now, remember, I told you I got that job when I was 14, been working ever since, through college, through law school. And for the first time, just took a real intentional step back, and just started journaling, about what it is that I wanted next. I did a vision board, which included a beautiful picture of Greece. And about 2 weeks later, I got an offer to come to Greece, which
Wow.
was pretty incredible and transformative. But I don't think I necessarily needed to be in Greece to do it, but it forced me to take a necessarily step back and just
Hmm.
reflect on my life up until now. I had a great advice from a friend who suggested a values assessment that was
Mm.
like, how is it that you're living your life? How is it that you want to live your life? And are the two in alignment? And what can I
Mm.
do to kind of bring those things into alignment? So I realized that I wanted to make an impact. I also wanted more control of my time. I wanted to be really more deliberate with how I spent my time. And as a result, I just started noodling, and Culture and Quill was developed. I thought, here is an opportunity for me to make the impact that I want, kind of work with different organizations still in this space of storytelling and those areas that I'm passionate about, but I get to own it, and determine what my time looks like and how I spend it, and be more conscious of my tendency to overwork, in a way that I can create better kind of barriers and boundaries around my life. So that's how I entered this space.
That's wonderful. I mean, everything that you were saying, I was, because for a living, I deal with conflict in organizations, and really what I deal with conflict with the individual, right? And so much of what you said, I was just really thinking about that is all such great advice for dealing with whatever environment you find yourself in, because we want to say it's the culture or something else. And while there is the culture aspects, I think so much with work-life balance. Well, what am I taking on and why? Why am I
Yeah.
saying yes to this? And I don't know when this happened to me, but I'm really good at saying no. I don't know why exactly, but I suppose I'm a bit stubborn, and I haven't always well, I've always been stubborn, but I haven't always said no, right? Because we are helpers, we want to do, and when we see a problem, we want and we know we can solve it or be a part of it, we tend to take those things on. But really that self-reflection of who am I? What do I want? What do I want my life to be about? And sometimes there's so many good things, but really too much good external things is too much, right?
Yeah.
So really that's so wonderful that you were able to have people speak into your life that helped you along the way to figure out what it is that you want. And
Yeah.
I think that's just really beautiful.
Yeah, I love what you said too about saying no. I found because I have not always been good at that. I am definitely a like, let's make it work person. That's sort of in my nature. But I've been able to reframe those no's as being protection. And I think that
Mhm.
that's kind of been key, too. And I think that was even, I tell you, I feel like I was being moved by something outside of myself when I wrote that resignation letter. I sat on
Mm.
it for a weekend, slept on it, talked to the family about it, but I felt like it was like that I have to do this at this
Mhm.
juncture. And that was a big no, right? I mean, it was a
Yeah.
fancy title. It was all the things, it looked great on paper, but it wasn't great for me, and it
Mhm.
was a necessary no. And since then, there's just been a lot of things that have opened up as a result of sort of that ability to be able to say no to things that aren't for you.
Yeah. And right, saying no is saying yes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying yes to my family. I'm saying yes to what I want to do with my relationships. I'm saying yes to being more present in the work that matters to me.
Yeah.
And in order to sustain those yeses, it takes time. Sometimes when we are good at things, we think, oh, I can do this, that, and the other. But the whole burnout happens and it can just creep up on us. And then, like, I find myself laid out on the bed, like I'm no good
Yes.
to anybody, right? Because in oh, I can take this on, take this on, take this on. If we don't step back periodically, even when we feel fine about, okay, where is my time going and making those continual intentional decisions, then we end up not being our best self at the things that matter the most to us. And
Yeah.
right, I do believe that the quality of our life is commensurate to the quality of our relationships, and quality relationships just take time and attention.
And I mean, it's all we have, right? I think
Mhm.
time became such a key and core word for me as kind of a motivation to move forward. I think when we're consumed by work, time goes by really fast. You know,
Hmm.
those are those moments where you look up and you're like, wait a minute, it's November already? Like, what happened? You know,
Right.
and when you think back, like that's all we get, right? It's so precious. So any opportunity to slow it down, you know, to be more intentional with those moments. I remember within the first month or so of leaving the role, and I'll tell you, there's a discomfort period, right? Of like, because we're so accustomed to leading with our title. You know, you meet someone, what
Yes.
do you do, you know, and now you have to
Right.
think about, you know, how do I answer this question and what does that mean? But I remember I have an 8-year-old, my littlest, and we were at the playground and I didn't have any work emails to check, right? I didn't have any urgency to get back to the home office or anything. So I was just fully present with him, watching him on the swing, watching him laugh. We have a big, you know, clumsy Bernedoodle and he's running around and it's just kind of this really beautiful moment. And he says, and I'm going to get choked up because every time I tell this story, I do, but he says, Mommy, I'm having the best life.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you know, it really kind of brought home all that I had sacrificed, you know, with the time that I was taking away and you know, the why of it all. Like, why did I feel the need to be so busy?
Yeah.
Why was there so much urgency? You know, like what was I trying to distract myself from? And,
Yeah.
you know, it took a lot of work, you know, to get to a space where I just felt more comfortable just existing, like with an identity that is just completely separate from my work one.
Yeah, I mean, I hear like even from the beginning of why go into law, well, people like that. But
Yeah.
I majored in philosophy and taught philosophy forever. And I remember when I said I was going to major in philosophy, the looks of like either terror or, whatever, And you do respond to like, why are people thinking this is a bad decision? And you're young, right? And so we do want to please other people. But making those decisions for others is not about making the life for ourselves, right? And
Yeah.
so that internal versus external locus of control, and the more we are self-empowered and the more we're able to be our authentic selves, we can declutter the noise of the other that are pulling us. And they're a lot of times they're pulling us for this imagined our own good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not doesn't have to be nefarious at all, but the question is always, okay, but this is my one life and these are my values and these other things might be good, but not for me anymore,
Yeah.
or not for me, or whatever it might be. But all of that takes quieting those external noises to find what is that. And it does change and shift. It's not for some of us, so it's one thing our whole life, but for most of us, it does shift in the different stages of our lives.
Yeah, and there's so much beauty in that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as we grow, you learn so many new things about yourself and about this world. I mean, it's natural. Like, even just the expectation that you pick one thing and that's the thing, you know, for the
Right.
rest of life is just kind of bananas, especially at 17, right? Or 18
Right.
years old. It's like, you know, I think that's the name of the story right now with my oldest son is kind of just this idea of like, okay, you try it, you know, you see what
Right.
happens. You may not even like this thing, you know, like just give it a shot. But you know, the idea that you can be receptive and open to reinvention and you know, learning different things about yourself. And to your point, something that worked for you then doesn't work for you now, and that's okay. And being open to that.
Yeah. And I think also with children, thinking about if choosing one thing and this is what you're going to do, as we all know, if we've already talked about, that's actually our life. What makes us who we are today is the variety of experiences. And so I am so thankful that I got a liberal arts education because I still think about that thing in my sociology course or my world religions course or my statistics course, all these other sorts of, and those are just, academic little things, but they have stuck with me and informed me. And my high school job at the yogurt shop and just being at a camp counselor or working at the craft hut or in the camp and all these experiences are opportunities to that come with us in our professional jobs. And so we meet this person and, oh, I can reach back into this experience, or that reminds me of this other thing. And so it's actually the more experiences we can have, the richer our lives are going to be, but then we can also bring that to others in our professional or our private life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I agree completely. I think back to kind of the pinnacle of my burnout, and kind of existing in workspaces for those workspaces and sort of losing parts of myself. And those parts of yourself, those things that you bring to your work environment make everything better, not just you, but
Right.
the ability to show up completely, fully, and wholly, benefits those environments just as much. So yeah, I mean, it for sure, warranted a slowdown, and that reflection too, just so that I can show up more fully, in those places that I'm donating my time.
So when you think about your history of work, maybe in your more professional roles, like in law and in journalism, can you tell us about a time you experienced a conflict with a colleague or a boss and how you dealt with it and how you moved through that?
Yeah. Oh goodness, that's such a good question. I have learned that one of my superpowers is, empathy, and to sort of be in a space where I can listen and understand. I think that's one of the things I like the most about myself as a leader and how I've led teams in the past. But I think what the way that that took shape probably early in my leadership career was maybe being a little bit too reflective, when in being a little bit hesitant, to kind of make a decision or a choice. We were in a particular space where this was when in my career in journalism where we were trying to make a call on kind of moving forward with a pretty controversial topic. And it was incredibly polarizing within our team at the time. We had people that felt very passionately that we shouldn't do it, very passionately that we had a moral obligation to do it. And when people start thinking you have a moral obligation, right? There's no other there's no other answer. And I think I struggled a lot to make each side feel seen and heard, even though for me it was clear kind of the choice that I needed to make
Mm.
when it came to the business, and the choice that was sort of best for the business. And I probably mulled over it a little bit too long, wasn't as decisive as I could have been at the time. It was a really, really important and instructive moment for me because I realized when you don't make a call, you make an enemy out of everybody, right? Because
Right.
like there were no allies left, in that situation. But ultimately I did have to sort of make the call, but probably dragged it out a little bit too long, with the employees. But it was again very instructive of me for me as a leader,
Mhm.
that there are just moments in your leadership journey where you have to make tough decisions and tough calls. I think that's too, when we think about work and the nature of work, why it's so important to sort of not use this sort of work as family, like, language
Mhm.
and lead with transparency, where
Mhm.
people are clear and understanding of kind of the rationale behind certain decisions. And that was a tough point for me, a little bit too, in confronting my own, I truly believe that there is a certain parentification that takes place in the workspace, like where, you tend to, I think maybe it's because we leave home and go straight into work environments where we feel a little bit like our works are our parents and our families. And I think I had a tendency to be protective,
Mhm.
as opposed to saying these are capable and amazing adults that
Mhm.
have given all the facts. They may or may not understand a decision, but it's better than sort of shielding people,
Mhm.
from what it is. So I think through that journey, I learned the importance of leading with transparency, leading from a space of like, equity, like where I can say, let's all talk about this so that you understand exactly what's at stake here. And I think it made me a better leader.
That's such a wonderful example because that happens so much. And, you know, a lot of conflicts in work environments have to do with communication, right? And so we desperately want our leaders to communicate. We want them to make the tough calls. We want to be informed on the process, like everything that you said. And when we don't see it happening on our timetable, we think they don't care, they're not paying attention. And yet, of course, as the leader of your, if you're being, if you're a good leader, the mulling over, like, that makes so much sense to me because I do tend to do that
Yeah,
as well. You
you're a muller.
overthink things and you want to get it just right and you're hoping you're going to get everybody on board. But certainly in a business, that is wish fulfillment, right? That's just not going to happen. And I think for a long time, well, definitely most of my life was as a people pleaser, but actually that is not treating people as adults.
Yep.
I'm not responsible for anybody else's happiness, their emotional responses. I'm responsible for myself and being as clear and kind as possible. But this is work. We are not all going to get our way, and it isn't our own little special project, right?
Yeah.
We've got this particular mission, and whoever is the leader obviously we want to be collaborative and all that, but then decisions do need to be made. And a part of being a good employee is accepting and moving on, right?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't get my way. Right? Psychological safety is making those environments where people feel safe to be heard, where I can speak up without fear of retribution, but it doesn't mean I get my way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that my voice was wanted. Okay, it did not go my way. Maybe, but they still want to hear I have not been shut down. And yeah, I think the parentification, I like the way you're saying that, it is, it happens, but I think, robs people of their own efficacy. And in my line of work, we see it that where people aren't solving their own problems because they've got to go to the boss, AKA the parental figure, really. Like raising your hand to go to the bathroom. No, if I have a problem with my colleague, I should be trained and empowered to go talk to that person instead of running to this person, my boss, to solve it for me, which doesn't solve it, makes a strain with my relationship with this other, and it doesn't encourage being a good colleague. Is what we want. We want a system of colleagues.
Yeah, and I'd say too, as a leader, it robs, folks of their ability to grow too, right?
Hmm.
I remember having a supervisor years ago that talked about I was just stepping into a new supervisory role, and he said, your staff is mostly pretty junior. A lot of them were fresh out of college. It's like they're gonna leave. That's just what happens, but it's a sign of a good leader where they leave and move on to a growth opportunity, right? Or they're not running away,
Right.
but kind of running to something. And I always took that with me too. As a leader, your responsibility too is, growth opportunities and allowing people to sort of step into those roles where they can communicate more effectively or grow in the skill sets required for their jobs. And I think that shielding, that parentification kind of robs folks of that ability as well. But I love what you said too about communication. There's a great Brene Brown quote that says, "Clear is kind."
Yes.
I
Yeah,
live by that.
I do too.
Like
I use it all the
as
time.
clear as you can be. And it's funny because I reflect on my own career at times where I felt sort of stagnant, and it was in those spaces where I'm just like, what am I supposed to do here? Or like,
Yeah.
how do I get to this next level? And it wasn't always, as clear. And I can definitely pinpoint the people pleaser supervisors that I had that didn't want to hurt my feelings, that were great human beings. But it's like, tell me those things that I need
Yeah.
to grow. I want to grow, I want to become better at X. And in order to do that, sometimes our supervisors are our kind of gatekeepers to that.
Hmm. And I think, one thing that we can do with communication when somebody is doing something that is not meeting expectation, the sooner the better.
Yes.
Because if it's at my annual review and I've been doing this for 9 months on the newsletter or the whatever I've been doing, yeah, okay, you're telling me clearly now, but it's kind of a betrayal. Where were you? We want that mix of our leaders to be involved, but
Yeah.
not micromanaging. But
Yeah.
that really, being a servant leader is knowing what's going on. And if something isn't um, going in a way that is positive, let me know right away, right? I want to
Yeah.
know before the event that I got something in my teeth, not like when I'm home and I, look in the mirror, I'm like, oh my gosh, how many people did I talk to like that?
And there's also the question too, do you not trust me to be able to grow or, kind of handle these
Hmm.
things? There's that piece too. It's just so important. It's so
Yeah.
important with that clarity.
And it's so easy though, I think, I mean, for me, I can solve everybody's problems except for my own, right? Like, oh, just do this. Oh, just do that. But when we think about our work environments and are enmeshed in this network of relationships, we have all different kinds of relationships with people, and some are very strong and some are brittle. Um, and so we're always trying to do this calculus of if I say this, what might happen? And if I say that. And I was looking at one of your blog posts and a recent one that you were talking about having a newsletter that is, what if it all works out?
Yeah.
And I love that with conflict management. A lot of times people won't act mostly out of fear. If I do this, it's going to make it worse. If I do this, I'm going to burn a bridge. And we don't want to do that, right? And there's all this stuff that's going on as to why we don't. But I love the idea of, which so much with conflict management is rewriting the script, telling a different story, other than the tired old tape that we have. But what if I talk to this person and he gets better? Right.
Yeah.
What are the possible good scenarios? We only play out the negative ones, which we think are so sure, but that doesn't give ourselves or our colleagues enough credit, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a North Star for me. It's something that I repeat. I have it on a post-it regularly at my desk. It really kind of came about from I had dinner with a friend. It was sort of when I was kind of like, I think I need to leave this role, and I don't think I need to go into a new one. I think I need to start my own business. And then I went down the all the negative things. But this is something, this, all the things, right? And she's known me for a long time. And she said, you said the same thing when you were leaving law, it was fine,
Right.
ultimately it was okay. And I had the same reaction. I had to chuckle because I was like, yeah, I really did put you through it during that period in my life too, because I just was down all the negative things, catastrophizing about what could
Hmm.
and in reality, what if it all goes right, right? It kind of it changes sort of how you move and how you interact. And moving up, the mobility, it's all about risk,
Hmm.
being able to grow. It's all about being comfortable with that. So this idea that maybe everything does go the way that you want it to, and if it doesn't, it may still work out,
Yeah.
because you have that ability to be able to kind of pivot and do the things that you need to do. So it was a wonderful jumping off point for me, to really kind of sit in reflection, but also really start to imagine what this next path was going to look like in this next chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. Going off of what you just said, if you have a difficult conversation with somebody and it doesn't go well, you have learned so much because conflict management is about personal empowerment. And it's like any skill, you don't get it just by wish fulfillment, you get it by doing it. So if I have a conversation with somebody and it doesn't go well, but I see it as I want to have this conversation, but I also want to develop. And so this is an opportunity of a learning from me. I'm not just going to sit this down and person down and tell them what a disappointment they are, right?
Yeah.
I am showing up because I want to grow and I do want things to be better. And so all that curiosity and de-escalation and really trying to partner with this other person. And if it doesn't work out, it has in a very significant way because the more you practice conflict resolution, the more you're likely to practice it because you see what it feels like. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. It's not as scary and bad. Okay, I'm going to try this differently. But what if it does work out?
Yeah,
And
I think too, sometimes we look at that discomfort as a
mhm.
sign that it didn't work out, but sometimes that discomfort is necessary, right? Like sitting in a place of uncomfortable conversation is necessary to get to the other side of it. So, agreed completely.
I've noticed in myself since I also was conflict avoidant for most of my life that now when I decide to have a difficult conversation if something is going on, I immediately feel excited, like, oh my gosh, I feel empowered. Like I'm not stewing in this anymore in the narrative. I can't do anything to affect change. This is just the way it is. All of a sudden, no, I am going to do something. And I'm so happy that I'm going to do something. And I'm also filled with dread. And I feel the quicksand, like, oh, I got to send that email or I got to make that call and all that stuff. But that's okay. Do it scared.
Yeah.
Do it. If you're convinced that it is something that is for your good and the good of the other. If this is something that, really is going to make things better in the long run, one way or the other, you know, do it. But you got to practice it. So right now I'm really
Yeah.
into practicing these difficult conversations with somebody who's friendly. Don't just go to the person that is causing you the most pain and say, all right, let's hash this out. You got to, if you are like me or somebody who has a difficult time with conflict, practice,
Yeah.
try it on, see what it feels like, and then go out.
I have to say it's funny because when you first said it was something that you were excited about, kind of leading up to the conflict, I was like, have I ever felt that way? And not too long ago, actually, I was kind of considering a potential client, and I probably knew, like, leading up to the engagement, I don't know if this is going to be kind of a great fit. Like, kind of the work style was very different than mine. And finally, we kind of got to a point where I realized, oh, I don't think that this is going to work out. Oh my goodness. It was one of the most difficult kind of leading up points for me to having this conversation. Because, like I said, I am a yes person. Let's make it work, let's figure it out. But kind of similar to when I kind of left the role, I was like, you have to kind of, in order for this to be amicable and be okay, you have to have this conversation now. And it was one of my strongest kind of no conversations of like,
Mm.
kind of, we've reached an impasse here. I feel like, this is a wonderful point for us to part ways and it still be amicable, still rooting for you, all the things. But it felt so good. It was uncomfortable, but it felt
Yeah.
so, because it was the ability to really kind of hash things out instead of sitting in that discomfort for months doing something that I knew wasn't kind of aligned with what I
Yeah.
wanted, but being able to confront it before it escalated or got to a point where, ties were broken and all of those things. But you're right, there is so much liberation in that, and
Mhm.
the ability to really confront things and have those tough conversations.
Yeah, and the growth that comes out of it. And I think one thing that I've appreciated the most is the trust in myself. Like
Yeah,
we both we're professional, we can do lots of hard things, right? Fine. But when we do those certain kinds of things that are really difficult for us, that we have been sitting in the discomfort, but we actually act, it's just like, this is who I am, right?
yeah.
I don't know. It's just, there's
Self.
some, yeah, it is wonderful. So it can be both scary and harrowing and can fill you with dread and liberating. And,
Yeah,
but the only way through is through, right? You got to go through that molasses. You got to go through what that is, that difficulty, that
yeah.
dissonance to get the reward. But the reward is from the discomfort. It's doing it.
Yep.
Like, we just want to bypass it so much, but then, you know,
Yeah, yeah, I can draw so many parallels to that, not just in how I relate to others, but even in how you relate to yourself, right? And
mhm.
navigating transition periods or change,
Yeah.
you know, in yourself. There's an internal conflict, right? That you
Mhm.
have to kind of manage and be okay being uncomfortable through. But agreed, the other side is always so much better.
Yeah. So tell us about Culture and Quill. What do you do?
Yeah, so I specialize in storytelling, strategic storytelling. So it takes the shape in so many ways. I can work with individuals who are interested in building thought leadership. I've worked with nonprofits who are kind of refining their brand story for partnership and fundraising. But I've also worked with big brands and media companies on campaigns to attract new audiences or to sort of expand their messaging. So I always say on any given day, I could be across a lot of different industries. My heart is always in health and wellness. That's just an area I love to work in. But I work cross industry, really kind of rooting out the story of an organization, and making sure that it connects with their audiences.
Mm. How do you see the story of an organization hook up with like or meet with their mission and their values? Are they one and the same? Do they need to? So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think your mission and your values should definitely reflect sort of the story of an organization. I always, say that people, don't buy products as much as you buy stories. Like,
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the lip bar, but it's a lipstick, and the woman was on Shark Tank, and Mr. Wonderful called her a cockroach. I mean, he was awful to her, right? And then she went on to make millions of dollars selling this lipstick, right? I don't know if I can find better colors otherwhere, but I'm going to shop at the lip bar until forever, right? I love that story. I love what she persevered. I'm a woman. I love to see other women succeed. So, I think it is so important for folks to connect with you. We
Mhm.
see that even now, no matter what side of the aisle you're on politics wise, people flocking to Blue Sky, right? Because, they want to make a statement about what they believe. So I think it's so important as brands to be able to connect with those things that are important to your audience, so you don't want there to be a disconnect between your mission and vision, kind of what drives you, what kind of put you in a position where you wanted to solve for a problem and you created whatever that solution looks like. But it's important for you to be able to connect those. People need to be able to see it the minute they click on your website, the minute that they look at your presence on social media. You want people to feel like they know you.
I really appreciate that because story is so evocative, and so the story you just told, right, about the lip balm and being called a cockroach, right? People can see that or that can resonate with them, but the story they're telling themselves about that story is also it is a way to personalize, right? So instead of just being told in black and white, X, Y, and Z, when we tell somebody a story, um, a man was walking down the road and he saw somebody beaten by the side of the road, and another person passed him by, right? And all of a sudden we're drawn into, oh, who am I in this story? What is the story about? And stories are just so powerful. It's like an immediate way to connect, right?
Yeah.
And I think in conflict management, the first thing I do in a mediation is I hear the person's story.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of times we don't understand that it's a story, it's a particular narrative that we've given ourselves. But it is a particular narrative based on the facts as we understand them or the facts as we value them. But our story can change, our narrative can change. Just like difficulties in work environments, some of the most difficult things that I've experienced in work environments, having distance, the story I told myself then and the story I tell myself now are very different. I have maybe a different understanding of what the facts might be, but I just feel very differently about it because I've told myself a different story because I have a different point of view. And I think that's really empowering that we don't have to be stuck in this is just the way of things. Well, what do you mean? How have you constructed this? Have you constructed this so that you are the hero or that you are the villain or that you were the victim or you're a little bit of each? But that is all up to us. And in conflict, most people are passive. They have told the story that they're passive. I can't do anything until the other person apologizes. And that's why I'm so interested in personal empowerment around dealing with conflicts early, often, swiftly, and justly, and helping people develop those skills because that everything is happening to you is just a narrative and it's not a necessary narrative and it's not a helpful narrative.
Yeah, I love too that you're using kind of stories as a mode of connection. There's actually been studies that show sort of that when we listen to a story, they conducted MRIs on like a storyteller and a listener. And when you're telling a story, it triggers the same parts of the brain in the storyteller as the listener.
Mm.
So you're deeply empathetic. You put yourself in those positions. So it's so important. It's so incredibly important to lead with story. I talk about that too. I think by nature of me practicing law for so long, I deal a lot with people who are just so deeply entrenched in industry jargon and just very used to sort of speaking a certain way, who are like, why can't I connect with my audience? And it's like, they don't understand anything you're saying, like, you have to think of a way to kind of meet people where they are. So I could see how incredibly important that is too, in dealing with conflict and finding resolutions is really finding those points of understanding where you can see yourself in someone else's story. It's not always easy, especially when you're dealing with, people who are in practicing law. I mean, there's could be very kind of hot issues on either side and people are feeling disconnected. But it's so important. It's just so important that we're able to see the humanity in one another.
So how did you do that when you were practicing law and you've got people who are, they've got these different positions and rooted
Yeah.
in maybe different interests? What are some techniques that you used to draw people to find some sort of amicable path forward?
Yeah, I found, and this is in law, I think it's in any industry, leading with your own vulnerability, is sometimes a great gateway. I think when you approach things, and, I think it's just by nature of how we approach work in general. Sometimes you come in very sterile, there's a lot of sameness, but you lose a point of connection. I think
Mhm.
I've heard that even in a medical malpractice, when someone apologizes,
Mhm.
it goes a much longer way than if you kind of come, very stoic and we are adversaries.
Mhm.
So I think even as someone who's sitting in a position of like, arbitrator or, who's kind of like the middle, because I've worked for a lot of judges throughout my career too, where, you have to make a decision about things. I think it's so important to come from a place of humanity, speak language that people can understand, don't just speak in legalese or over people's heads, look for points of relation, listen probably more than you speak,
Mhm.
I think is really, really important, giving people time to be heard and sort of work through things. I've worked for some great judges who were very, I'm going to cut you off and, you do this, you do that, and I've also worked for people that are kind of just like, get it out. And, that was sort of the approach that I took in practicing as well, as like, I'm going to let you be heard and let you say the things that you need to say, because so much of conflict is rooted in not feeling heard, right? Or
Yeah.
feeling misunderstood.
Yeah.
Is a big part of it. So I think that those have been, really, really important elements of that.
One thing you said that I just really appreciate about, the human, humanity, right? Connection. That's what we want, right? So our problems are with problems. Our problems are with people, right? And so that's how we're going to need to solve them, human to human. And when we feel objectified, when we feel not heard, how do we how do you think we help people in work environments? So you say you've got half the people you work with are identify as blue and half identify as red, and maybe there's some purple outliers that everybody is mad at, right? Because maybe they're one way or the other. How do you think in work environments, in such a tough environment that the US is in right now, that we can be good colleagues, even though we really disagree with other people's political stances, maybe some of their moral positions. Um, like, there's just so many hot button issues that we really have vilified the other side. Uh, how do you see us being able to still partner together to move forward to advance the mission of the organization?
Yeah. Oh goodness, it's such a great question because it's even in our own families, right? Like
Hmm.
it's just, I mean, it feels like it's everywhere right now,
Yeah.
given the climate. I was just having this conversation. I belong to a fantastic network of women executives, and we were just talking about this just as it relates to a lot of the work that we do. A lot of folks within the group are very mission driven, and they're worried, kind of like, will I still kind of get support for this work that I'm doing? And one woman in the group just said, she was really scared. She went into a conference sort of post-election, and she was like, how are people going to feel about this work? And she was surprised at this ability to sort of find these points of alignment, right? Like
Hmm.
finding those places where there is agreement, where there are these kind of non-negotiables about things that we can rally behind, and building solutions from there. The tough part is I think there always has to sort of be a willingness, on behalf of both kind of folks to sort of come together and find those points. But I think that you can. I mean, we're still all human beings, right? And there
Hmm.
are things that are just fundamentally true, I think, that we all believe that are important, and that we can all rally behind. So I think it's finding those places, those synergy,
Hmm.
finding, the compassion to listen, too. I have a family member who feels very strongly on one side of the political aisle. And I think so much of it comes from the fact that he does not feel heard and does not feel listened to.
Hmm.
So kind of slowing down, kind of this, the same thing that I was chatting about, and allowing people to be heard, not just mocking people for the things that they believe and the things that they feel, but
Yeah.
maybe pointing to some validity, kind of within some belief systems, even if you don't believe in the solutions, right?
Yeah.
But the problems having some validity, and finding places where you can come together. I know one thing that I did with him was just point out how different our feeds were on social media. Like,
Yeah.
look what we're seeing. Here's what I'm seeing. This could explain, why there's such a disconnect, what we're being fed. And I think the same thing kind of goes too in these environments. And I've dealt with it particularly in journalism, and having to kind of report on things objectively, depending on where I was, and having employees that were on various different sides. And for some people, their belief systems are fact.
Yeah.
Like there is, that's not opinion. This is what it is.
Right.
And that's a hard kind of hurdle to overcome. But, as I shared sort of in that example of managing conflict, that listening piece goes such a long way.
Yeah.
Overdid it in that instance. But,
Yeah.
I've since learned that that is such a valuable part of bridging that gap.
Yeah. And at work, right, we're not in the business of changing people, right? So you can have this belief and you can believe it is true till the cows come home, and that's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. So then the question is, but what are we going to do here? What does it mean
Yes.
to treat everybody here with dignity and respect?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the listening, especially, well, we're recording before Thanksgiving. This is going to come out a little bit later, but you know, people, when we think about the pendulum swing when it comes to social issues or political issues, people will swing to one side because they want to cut through the noise. Like, if I get a little bit more radical in this, then you'll have to hear me, right? But if we
Yeah.
give people space to, well, you can be a little bit more nuanced and we can have this discussion. And as you said, where can I give? Where can
Yeah.
I meet you if I really want to build a bridge, right? So Marshall Rosenberg said, we're either building bridges together with our words or we're pulling things apart. So
Yeah.
derision, mocking somebody for whatever their belief is a sign of emotional immaturity and is a sign that you need to be doing something about yourself instead of how can I extend the hand to the person who's clearly in pain or something is going on, or it is. I mean, we live in this time where people just aren't getting the same information. But we make decisions based on the information that is presented to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. I'll
Um,
have in there too, I think, to respecting people's boundaries too when it comes to
mhm.
that.
Yeah.
In that same group that I was chatting about, one member's former military, visibly uncomfortable talking about anything political. It's just
Mhm.
very clear that it's just not with her in her. And as someone who had a lot of military in my family, I get that. So the ability to say, even being an ally, like, hey, maybe we don't continue talking about this, or maybe
Mhm.
this isn't the space for that. That's okay too.
Yeah.
Respect people's boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in a work environment, I think it's, what does it mean to be professional? What are the sorts of things that we ought to be talking about? Because we're colleagues, we don't need to be friends, but we can be
Yeah.
friendly. We can have this wonderful community environment. So, what really are those boundaries? And the thing is, I might be comfortable talking about abortion issues and you may not be, or vice versa. Should we be talking about this at work? Because I've had the experience of being in a room where everybody on a particular social issue thinks that everybody's in agreement. And I'm like, oh, I felt,
Mhm.
these people don't care about me. They don't want to know me. And if they knew what I thought, I would be asked to leave.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we just assume that especially when it's so important to us, we assume other rational people will think the way that we do.
Yeah.
But really, I think as leaders, what is the environment we want? What are divisive things that don't have to do with whatever we're doing here as we're making these widgets or doing these spreadsheets or whatever it might be, that could just serve to be divisive.
Yeah.
And let's do something else. We can have fruitful conversations, but it's not easy, I think, to have good relations, but have those boundaries. But of course, the boundary is for us to make and us to keep,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Assumptions too, just to that point, are so
Mhm.
dangerous. I mean,
Yeah.
people make them based on people's race. They make them, there's all sort, and it's, you just never know, you just never know. So I think respecting those boundaries is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Faye, it's been so wonderful talking with you today. So I'm going to end on the question that I usually end with. I just looked at the time; it's been totally getting away from me. So, as you look into the future of work and you think about your kids out in the work environment, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will they be treated with dignity and respect, but that they are encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Yeah. Ooh, it's such a beautiful question. And I think, I go back to that point about pointing inward. I think your autonomy and your ability to control your destiny lies with you. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, I did a panel on burnout at South by Southwest this year. And I was just talking to my panelists sort of about it. And I say, did we just throw everything away? Is it just so fundamentally flawed that there's no way we can't be burnt out in these environments? And there was silence. I think everyone was considering it. And, I think what became clear to me then and what has since become even clearer to me is we just have to change our relationship with it, right?
Mhm.
We have to be able to have autonomy over the decisions we make. We have to have multiple streams of income. So we're not completely reliant on one place as the source of all of our income and our validation, and all of those things. So I want my children, I want people just entering the workforce to feel that sense of autonomy over their decisions,
Mm,
not do what I did and just think a lot about what other people are going to think about those things, but really truly feel like they can make those decisions for themselves.
yeah. I love that answer because really autonomy is the root of taking responsibility for the self, but also realizing what isn't our fault, right? What are structural or organizational issues, but it is a kind of clarity. And as we know, clarity is kindness even to ourselves. So thank you so much, Faye. I really appreciated our time together.
Thank you so much, Mary. This was great.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you, Faye, so much for being on Conflict Managed. I just really enjoyed our conversation and what a light you are, and I love the work that you are doing. And I'm excited to read your book when it comes out. Faye is working on a book on a lot of the topics that we discussed, and so I look forward to that. And I love your voice and the way that you think and reason. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And our conversation, you can watch it on YouTube at 3P Conflict Restoration. If you haven't had a chance to check out my book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do and considers what should we do instead to have a healthy work environment. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.